Okay, well, let's just go ahead and get started. Let me begin by introducing myself. For those who don't know who I am, my name is Matt Friedman. I'm the CEO of the Mekong Club. Today, we're having a combination working group meeting and webinar presentation with Philippa King, who's going to be talking about procurement protocols and supplier engagement, which is a topic that is very relevant and important to many of us. To just introduce kind of a few things that the Mekong Club is working on, I'd just like to spend a few minutes just going through a couple of my own slides. To begin with, what we have been doing recently in order to ensure that we're addressing the needs of our community is asking what topics that you think are relevant and important. And so we sent an email around with a list of different options, and what we came up with were three that were voted to be the most relevant to this particular working group. So today we're focusing on hotel procurement. In a upcoming presentation in the next couple of months, we'll focus on supply chains, and then there will be something related to third-party contracts and suppliers. And so each of them has a little bit of a different spin on modern slavery as it relates to the hospitality sector. But all of these particular topics are relevant as we're moving forward in this day and age of sustainability, ESG, SDGs, et cetera, et cetera. So you will get invitations to these other events in the coming weeks. Another thing that I wanted to just talk about is recently we piloted a series of two courses, a 101 course, which is an introduction to modern slavery as it relates to the hospitality sector, and then a 201, which is a more advanced course that then went into more details related to various aspects of modern slavery as it relates to the hospitality sector. This again includes procurement and awareness raising and training. What should your employees know, and how does it relate to construction and supply chains and third-party contractors and sex trafficking and so forth. This was a certificate program. We had over 100 people attend. These are more refined versions of trainings, and they're available to anyone in our association who hasn't had one in a while. Depending upon the hospitality organization, sometimes this is for managers or directors. Other times it's for everyone in the organization, and it's really up to you to decide. So if you're interested, let us know, and we'll provide the information related to that. We've been doing a fair amount of work with SMEs also. Many of these SMEs would be the equivalent of your suppliers. We received some money from a donor to do this in Vietnam, Thailand, Hong Kong. We've also done it in Canada. And the idea is to help organizations that are small to understand the issue of human trafficking, how it relates to their business. And to just put this into perspective, I'll give you an example that happened in Bangladesh. We were doing some SME training there, and I had a small restaurant company come up to me. It was three young women who were selling organic food, and their big business was beginning to take off, and a bank was interested in catering from them. So the bank went to them and said, okay, well, what's your cost and everything else? And then when they were moving forward in the negotiations, the bank said, well, what's your policy related to human trafficking? How do you train your staff? How do you determine whether or not your supply chain has modern slavery? These were just four young women, didn't know anything about this topic. And because they couldn't answer that question, they lost the order, and it went to somebody else who was a competitor who had those things. And so we work with the SMEs to ask, the questions. Do you have awareness raising? And if the answer is no, we give them the awareness raising material. Do you have a code of conduct? No. Here's a sample. You can apply it to your business. Do you have e-learning? No. Here's the e-learning. And so the idea is to give the SMEs what it is that they need in order to allow for that comparative advantage to take place. Another thing that we're doing, and you'll get an email about this soon, is developing short videos that focus on topics related to modern slavery, human trafficking, child labor, human rights due diligence, and the hospitality sector. We use a technology that generates AI videos. So what you see is a person like what you'll see on the bottom here. that is reciting the text related to this with background visuals and so forth. And then this allows for us to standardize messages, to do them with a high production value, and also to put it in multiple languages. And so we're offering this to our community. If you have particular suggestions on videos that you think need to be made, let us know. And then these could be used on your websites and so forth to sensitize your people. We recently did one on hospitality and procurement. It's about 4.5 minutes long. If you're interested in getting a copy of that, let us know. But this will give you a sense of the flexibility that goes along with what AI technology allows us to do. Interestingly, we had some recent contact with some of our hospitality members, and while we usually focus on modern slavery, we've been asked to talk about human trafficking into scam centers and scamming in general. We do a lot of work with the banking sector related to this particular topic, but for some reason, there seems to be an interest in this particular topic. If you don't know anything about it, what we're seeing is a couple of 100,000 young professional Asian people have been tricked and deceived into going to Cambodia, to Laos, to Myanmar. And when they get there, they're forced to scam. If they don't meet targets, they get tortured and tasered, and terrible things happen to them. And so I think part of the reason why hospitality industry is interested in us providing talks on this is because some of their employees may be interested in going overseas and so forth. And so it's really important for them to understand this particular topic. If you're interested, let us know. Just a couple of other final points. In previous presentations, I've talked about the profits generated from modern slavery. Used to be 150 billion, but since the last time that we spoke to you, it's gone up to 236 billion. The amount of money that's available to fight this is about 350 million. So what you see is huge profits generated by this in a small amount of money that's available to fight it, which is why we have less than 1% of the victims that are helped globally related to this topic. And lastly, we also received some money from the Australian government to do a series of presentations that have more of a financial emphasis, but at the same time, they are also relevant to some of the things that you do within your organizations. And so I'll ask Kat, our project manager, to basically send invitations to all of you if you're interested. You can attend them or not. They will also be recorded, and there are just some insights related to that particular sector that might be relevant to what it is that you're doing as well. So with that, I'm going to end and basically hand this over to Philippa King, who's going to do her presentation. She'll introduce herself as well, and at the end we'll have questions and answers. And over to you, Philippa.
Philippa, you're on mute.
Second time lucky. Hi, good morning, everyone. My name's Philippa King, and I am the Managing Director of Shiva Foundation. We are a small NGO in the UK and work predominantly on labour exploitation, modern slavery, particularly that gap between practice and legislation, and developed a Stop Slavery Blueprint, I think back in 2018 for the hospitality sector. So really delighted to be invited today and share some insights on how you can address modern slavery and human trafficking risks through your procurement protocols and supplier engagement. Hopefully by the end of this session, you'll understand the importance of actually having the modern slavery statement within your organizations, ethical procurement protocols, and then just looking about the due diligence and best practices for engaging with your suppliers. And again, the risk mapping piece of actually where the highest risk is of modern slavery, labour exploitation in your supply chains, and what procedures and protocols are best practice to follow if you discover that there is an incident of exploitation in your supply chains. Um, so I think most of you know what modern slavery and human trafficking is. I think that it's important to note that actually it happens on a continuum of exploitation. So on the one end, you know, good labour rights, you've got decent work, but then there's various different levels of abuses, to labour market infringements through to actual modern slavery on the other end. Um, and some workers, employees, and contracted staff are more vulnerable to exploitation than others. I think this is due to obviously lack of immigration status, homelessness, language barriers, if they paid recruitment agencies, and also individuals who lack a social network, they could be more vulnerable to being exploited. Um, so there's various sectors and businesses that there's various sectors that businesses procuring are high risk for labour exploitation. So these are, again, largely low-skilled migrant workers, and the workforce has frequently been outsourced or subject to subcontracting. One example of this could be the practice of workers being forced to pay recruitment fees in construction or in the care sector, agricultural sector, fishing sector. And this is very common and can lead to exploitation. And a main method that traffickers use around this is actually through debt bondage, where personal debt is forcibly used to control labour. I think it's really important to note that businesses have a key role to play in setting an example in rooting out exploitation. While many businesses globally are voluntarily publishing transparency statements, and more legislation is coming through, for instance, in the European due diligence framework, it's likely to become more mandatory as things progress. I think, you know, modern slavery can infringe on multiple human rights at once. So it's the right to work, the right to just and favourable working conditions, freedom of association and collective bargaining, freedom from degrading treatment, and obviously the rights of communities and indigenous people as well. So moving on, modern slavery often mainly operates in the informal economy, meaning that it can cause businesses to lose out on tax revenue that could be invested towards other community investments. And often the proceeds are channeled at the moment through legitimate financial systems to finance other crimes. It could be it could be used to fund drug trafficking, which often uses children globally as transporters. One instance actually that's been highlighted in the UK is the UK PPE's supply chain had North Korean forced labour involved, actually, which put the UK government at risk of unintentionally funding North Korea's nuclear programme. So what can we all do? We all have a role to play in doing whatever we can do to protect human rights. And I think, you know, as procurement staff for businesses, we are uniquely placed, you are uniquely placed with the ability to actually look to protect the human rights of communities that you serve, as well as communities further down the supply chains for the goods that you're procuring for your business. As many of you will be aware that hospitality is a high-risk sector. It's not only used to exploit people from sexual exploitation, but because of the informal economy and lots of, you know, labour abuses in the supply chains as well. And yeah, systematic issues within the industry are also causing adverse outcomes for workers. So it's great that you're all signed up today to listen to this, because actually we can address these systemic challenges and, you know, take proactive stances to safeguarding the well-beings of others. So just going down into more detail of actually things that we can do. So the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, which was adopted in 2011, sets out a framework for states and businesses. It says that the state has a duty to protect against human rights by third parties, including businesses, and to ensure that victims have greater access to effective remedy, both judicial and non-judicial. So all that to say is, as corporations, we do have a responsibility to protect human rights, and it comes under the UNGPs on business and human rights. It was a groundbreaking first, and it's, you know, no longer just applies to states, it's to businesses as well. So what is a modern slavery statement? So I'm just trying to move on to the next slide. It's different from a general commitment to tackle modern slavery, as it requires you to actually go further. So what it does is it outlines the organisation's public commitment to steps that you're taking to address modern slavery risks, and what you intend to do, an action plan for the coming year. It's also in many parts of the world public facing. And having a public commitment to tackle modern slavery also lends itself well to being able to share your work with others, both internally and externally. Um, so, for example, this could be having a poster on materials in back of house about your work displayed, which not only allows staff to be able to see the commitments, but potentially some clients as well. Um, and again, this is an important step in the world where people are more and more interested in the social side of businesses. They can also play an important anchor and accountability mechanism for you and your wider team. So it's vital to ensure that you actually create modern slavery statements in collaboration with management, different teams within the hospitality industry, and also then that flows in and it can be incorporated into the responsibilities of the relevant person and on job roles within the hotel. Aligned to this is having a ethical procurement policy. So just to unpack this a little bit, this is basically a set of core requirements, ways of working, which are important, and values to the administration. And then this can be cascaded down to how you're treated as workers within the organisation, but also to contractors and subcontractors. And what we do recommend when you first start introducing these, that these apply to contracts over a certain amount, and obviously you'll know who your big contractors are within that space. And we really do recommend that you put this into your policies, schedule, and standard terms and conditions. So just unpacking that a little bit more. So for employment and contractual and working conditions, this includes freedom to choose to work and not to work. It requires employees to lodge, so they uphold contractual agreements, hours and remuneration, and clear policies and procedures for whistleblowing or any disciplinary procedures. It's really important that staff have freedom of association and collective bargaining power, working hours and regular employment, and humane treatment. So, you know, there must prohibit physical abuse or coercion, not to discriminate in hiring, not compile, use, sell, supply any lists of employees, or details of people, or gender pay equality. And in the UK, we have something called the living wage, and we ask suppliers to declare that they have read and understood that policy and that they set that out in their terms and contracts. So I think, you know, as a business, we have quite a lot of leverage to ensure good practice and ethical procurement is in place with those that we work with. So I thought it would be quite helpful to show how to what a due diligence process is with both existing and new suppliers. So It's much easier to start these conversations when you're onboarding a new supplier and sharing your protocols, your modern slavery statements. But it's, yeah, so if a first place to start is to update your procurement contracts to account for sector-specific risks. So, you know, there's a mapping process that you look through your supply chains and identify which areas are more prone to high risk areas of abuse and exploitation. And then integrate your policies into your due diligence requirements and specification of works. You want new suppliers to actually make a commitment to your supplier charter. And this is actually the requirement of your selection process. And then, you know, you map when you're doing the assessment of your bidding process to look at against your modern slavery statement to see if they are in line with that. And again, it's really important to establish clear reporting and remediation pathways if you think that exploitation is happening in your supply chain. So on new contracts, I just want to reiterate that it's much easier to have these conversations at the beginning with suppliers and set out your expectations. When it's when you're working with existing suppliers, it's a slightly different conversation to have. I think the best place to start is actually to look at where the highest level of risk is and prioritize your focus on that. And it's a conversation to be had. You want to engage with those suppliers and actually assist them in moving towards best practice. One tool that some organizations use who have enormous spend, they may look to increase leveraging their influence over suppliers to work to comply with the procurement protocols by potentially thinking about moving away from smaller suppliers to larger ones. But I think hold that very lightly, because actually we do have a role and a duty and a real opportunity actually to have those conversations to get continued and continuous improvement. So just diving a little bit deeper into what is risk mapping and why is it important? I think in the context of hospitality supply chains, these are really complex systems that enable the provision of goods and services, which are obviously essential for the delivery of the operations and the service. And they can be organised into various different tiers, reflecting on the different levels of suppliers and services. So how we categorise it is tier one suppliers are those that are directly providing goods and services to the hotel, while tier two may offer material or services to tier one suppliers. And as these tiers continue to go further down, it actually creates a really complex web of interconnected businesses. So each supply chain component is crucial to ensure that the seamless functioning of the hospitality industry. So the increased globalized nature of businesses enables products to be sourced from all corners of the world. And this globalization, while fostering accessibility to products and services, also can present significant risks for modern slavery, as exploitation can often go unnoticed within the levels of subcontracting. So it does make it very challenging to detect and eliminate. So actually mapping your risks in the supply chain involves pinpointing areas of vulnerability and actually taking proactive measures to mitigate against them. So yeah, I think I just covered off there as well. So again, I think doing the risk mapping piece is really crucial in identifying where the most vulnerability will be, and start focusing on having those conversations and putting the protocols and the supply chain sort of management in those areas first. So just unpacking this a little bit. So there's 5 stages to risk mapping your product supply chain. So first off, it's identifying the organizations within your supply chain, the tier 1, the tier 2 suppliers, then overlaying that with the known risks in the sector. And then again, looking at prioritizing engagement. So is that by spend? Is that by risk sector? And then it is that ongoing conversation with your suppliers, understanding what they are doing proactively to mitigate against these risks, having conversations, and then ongoing management of those suppliers and the actions that they're taking. So a database obviously should be kept of all of the organizations in your supply chain, and this can be used to actually track and risk and record progress. You know, include things like the acknowledgement of the supplier code of conduct, ethical trade suppliance, have they got the relevant required licenses available, what processes are in place, preventing illegal working, what health and safety processes are in place, and if need be, an improvement action plan and audit dates. So contexts of identifying risk are really crucial. So weak rule of law, high incidence of corruption, insufficient safeguarding of human rights by the government, they may all increase the likelihood of workers being exploited in a particular country or region. Some commodities or derivatives are known to be more likely to have been produced using forced labour. And this can be closely linked to country risk, as well as the vulnerability of a specific worker demographic. So some examples of high-risk products, which are commonly used within the hotel industry, are the house cleaning and laundry, bedding, electronics, and technology as well. So to effectively manage your prioritization with your suppliers, considering the resource and the constraints that you have internally, I think it's important to acknowledge these challenges. And we strongly recommend that procurement teams actually engage first and concentrate their efforts on tier 1 suppliers to begin with. And also those that constitute a substantial proportion of your procurement expenditure. So engaging with your suppliers, I mentioned the supplier code of conduct earlier. On our website, shivafoundation.org.uk, there's actually lots and lots of resources that you can download and templates and tools, this being one of them, under the resources section. Please feel free to use our supplementary materials and the supplier code of conduct, modern slavery statements as well. I think it's really important to note that the purpose of these conversations is not to terminate all relationships when full compliance is not met. It's the beginning of a good discussion about human rights. And I think, you know, have an open discussion about your principles, your expectations with your suppliers, and allow them time to engage with and meet your expectations. And obviously what you want to see is that suppliers over the long term seek to adapt their business practices. This can be done through appropriate management processes. So we recommend that you have formal review meetings with your suppliers, maybe yearly, just regular compliance tracking, looking at the supplier's processes, policies, performance against your company's supply chain expectations. Often spot checks can be really useful on your staff working in hotels to ensure that if you're using recruitment agencies, that these workers are actually working to an agreed standard that you've made with them. And I think once due diligence is in place with the supplier, you just can have set up regular and ongoing audits to check that agreed conditions are being met. SEDEX, actually, this is quite a good example, is a global non-for-profit organization which actually houses the world's largest global collaborative platform, sharing responsible sourcing data on supply chains. It provides an ethical trading audit to organizations. So again, SEDEX is a great resource for you to look at. And I think lastly, it's vital to emphasize that the identification and assessment of risks is an ongoing process. Hotel management and procurement departments should, we recommend allocated dedicated time for regular risk assessments related to modern slavery to ensure the safety and ethical integrity of your product supply chains. All, and all this fosters a responsible and sustainable practices. So I think improving social and ethical standards in the supply chain, whether it's product or labour related, is a challenging process. It requires cooperation from your employees, from suppliers, from business partners and other stakeholders. And I think we also need to recognise that compliance to a supplier code of conduct and other goals may not be immediately achievable. But I think, as long as we all remain committed to working collaboratively, then, we can work towards these shared goals. One way to uphold this might be to come up with principles or ways of working with your team and your suppliers to adhere to. Principles can also be used as a way to demonstrate the senior level of commitment from your organization and engagement with your suppliers. And I think having senior leader buy-in and actively discussing commitments to tackle modern slavery leaders with suppliers and other stakeholders is really crucial. What could some principles look to include? So these could include, work to fair, transparent and mutually agreed terms and conditions, making sure that you pay for services provided on time and in full, acknowledge specific national or regional challenges when you're working with others, cultural challenges as well. And I think obviously trust is really important, protecting the confidentiality of information shared with you, and fostering that really trusting relationship. And ensuring that all relevant employees are aware of these commitments that both organisations are making. Worst case scenario, I think it's, important to cease trading with suppliers that demonstrate that they are persistently disregarding the supplier code of conduct that you're asking them to adhere to. I think it's really important to get formal recognition of the expectations that you have with your suppliers. I think a constructive engagement around the sharing of best practice can be a good foundation for open dialogue. And the code of conduct should apply to all types of supplier relationships. And I think if the discussions happen at the design and building stage with either franchisers or professional teams or contractors, when you're fitting out your hotel space, at the decoration stage with furniture suppliers, fixtures, fittings, at the moving in stage during the purchase of operational teams as well as food and beverage, and then obviously at the operational stage with employees and service agents. What we also have found is that having clear and straightforward protocols internally for when an incident is discovered is really crucial to ensure that victims get support. So where employees identify a potential victim of labour exploitation or modern slavery, it's really important to have a clear, specific internal procedure to protect the safety of that individual. Hotels, you'll most likely have your own crisis or emergency protocols, and these can actually be adapted to include actions to tackle modern slavery. Some suggestions on this is prevention protocols. So we recommend that hotels should appoint someone who can take on the role of monitoring the areas of risk on a regular basis. And we call these an anti-slavery lead in the UK. And they report anything unusual to an anti-slavery committee as appropriate via using the incident protocols that you have in place. We strongly recommend that general managers are recommended for this position, and that they actually should take a proactive approach. And often, you know, if you're part of a chain in consultation with the head office, it's having an anti-slavery committee is really useful, and we recommend that this is made up of cross-functional teams. So sitting on that committee would be key representatives from head office, from front of house, back of house, from procurement teams, and together should review the hotel reports on a case-by-case basis and determine again if there are any actions that can be taken to prevent similar cases of exploitation or abuse happening in the future. And again, I think that is a really good space for the group to review external benchmarks, legislation changes that need to be brought back into the hotel and the hospitality sector, and feed into updating your protocols and processes. And then just finally moving on, I think if an incident has been reported, there are actually various key steps that can be taken to ensure you've addressed any underlying concerns within your hotel. And again, this is quite important to have in your modern slavery statement, so that people that you are working with are aware of the processes as well. So any investigation beyond the initial report obviously should be performed by your local police or victim services in the area where you are. And it needs to have the full support of your anti-slavery lead, your anti-slavery chair, and we also recommend that an internal investigation of the report is made by staff in conjunction with external actors, and so that lessons can be learned and it can be looped back into how any mitigations or further training and processes and protocols need to be made. Obviously, it's really important that each organisation establishes links with the police and other key contacts that are addressing modern slavery risks in the area before the incident is or any potential incident could take place. Um, uh, and then if an investigation is happening in your hotel or your supply chain, and it confirms the instance of slavery, then organisations should look very much to ensure that a victim is protected and aware of all options and access for remedy. This will look different in different locations globally, but again, internal staff should work in advance and have part of it as your processes and systems to ensure that victims of modern slavery, if it's in the labour chain, actually can continue employment if possible. And finally, a root cause analysis, once the incident has taken place, can really help determine why the incident involved a business, a supplier, or employees. And I think it's important to note that if applicable, and upon the severity of the incident, written warning notice or notice of termination should be given to the supplier or contractor or subcontractor if they have violated your policies. And again, having senior management, general managers, as point persons of the anti-slavery lead, allows them to monitor the progress for a hotel of reports made and follow up where necessary. I just alluded to other partnerships and the importance of engaging with those. I think it's, we have, the hospitality sector has a unique opportunity to address modern slavery, and engaging in your wider community. And, this is done through working with your business partners and investment partners, looking to join networks and alliances in the local region, and also working with specialist service providers such as the Mekong Club and others, who can actively participate in, providing you with valuable resources, expertise, and best practices to really help bolster your efforts to address modern slavery. And I think also, working and collaborating with local charities and community partners really can allow your staff, to just further employee engagement. And yeah, not only are you helping your hotels to fulfill their legal responsibilities and social responsibilities, but I think it also can create a more impactful approach to working with your staff, but also working with other partners in the space, a more impactful approach to tackling modern slavery. And I think that is the end of my presentation.